This week on Beer and Business, it's RoboKind.
Hey Milo, that's my line. Welcome back to A Beer and Business. I'm Tom Ellsworth, the Biz Doc, and this week it's my privilege to be with Richard Margolin, the CTO and co-founder of RoboKind, the educational robot company that's changing the lives of some very special children. But first, thanks to our good friends at Petticolas Brewery, we have a golden opportunity, and I salute you as an entrepreneur, sir.
Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you, and I appreciate you being here. So why don't we start with what is RoboKind as a company? How do you describe your company? And then let's talk all about you and your background.
RoboKind is an education company, first and foremost, that is hiding under the guise of a robotics company. So we create small, facially expressive robots, and we use them in education to teach social and emotional skills to kids on the autism spectrum through our Robots4Autism curriculum. And now we're also starting to teach kids to code at the elementary school level through our new Robots4STEM program.
That's fantastic. And I'm sure the first question that comes to mind with everybody is, how did you as an entrepreneur end up here? This is pretty specialized. It's a lot different than, hey, I've got an idea for a social media app for fishermen. I mean, this is pretty technical. How'd you get here?
I've been an entrepreneur since I was 13 years old. Every hobby I've ever had has become a business, basically. But before I started RoboKind, I was the engineering director for another humanoid robotics company, building human-scale, facially expressive, and socially interactive robots, and ended up supporting a lot of research at universities in autism and education. And I saw some real significant evidence that robots like this could be beneficial for people with autism, but the robots we were building at the time were wildly expensive and not really good to go into classrooms with young kids. When I left that company to start RoboKind, the goal was to build real product, and by that I mean to address what we really needed. So a small robot that was durable enough to be in a classroom with kids as young as 6 years old and could take a beating every day, basically. Real curriculum, so a real use case, so the social and emotional curriculum tailored to people with autism, and then all of the training materials and supports and data collection and reporting and all the other stuff you need for this to be functional in a classroom as just a take it out of the box, learn how to use it real quick, and just run with it type of product.
That is amazing, because you've just hit on three things: the passion of an entrepreneur, the aptitude of a technologist, and finding a true cause or solution in the market where you're not like, hey, let's build Facebook and maybe people can interact better. You're seeing in these kids, these dear sweet kids, and my wife teaches them at the Heritage School here in Dallas. You may have heard of it.
Yeah.
She works with the kids that are Asperger's to high stress dyslexia and the things there. Mm-hmm. So she stops right before you get to the basic autism and of course the high functioning autism and things I'm sure you see all the time.
Yeah.
But I see it coming home, and she's got this passion for these kids and wonders, where are the solutions going to come in education that are going to help them? And that last kernel there, you really caught that. So was it the technology that was on your heart? Was it seeing what happened with the kids? What led you to say, you know what, I'm going to leave this company and I'm going to take the full entrepreneur jump, finding money, getting my first product, all the headaches and things that are going to come there? Which element of it was the one that sparked you to take that step?
Was really kind of the heart aspect of it. Like the technology, I've been building technology for a long time. I've been in research and development for a really long time, for as young a guy as I am. But I finally saw an application with the things I was doing and kind of already good at doing and knew how to do, and saw a way to kind of build something around it that could actually help people and wasn't just a neat thing you see on CNN or Fox News occasionally, or wasn't just some consumer product that was kind of cool for 10 minutes and then people put it down and never think about it again.
What was that first step like? You're going to open a lab or you're going to open something. What was that first step like, and where did you find the capital, and what were those early days like?
The early days were interesting because we started this while I was still engineering director for this other company, and kind of licensed a lot of the intellectual property that I'd worked on at that other company. Our first year and a half, we officed out of the other company I was working for, and then kind of, split out slowly, and then eventually got our own office. But the office being at that time someone's living room. I was able to basically do that. I have a co-founder who's actually my father, and my father's a lifelong entrepreneur as well. And so I grew up in a house where entrepreneurship was the norm, and me deciding to be a scientist and then an engineer was kind of me being the outlier. We got some initial seed capital. We were kind of sharing resources with this other company I'd been working for. First step was just build something that we can start showing off and testing. And so our first robots were not quite inexpensive enough to really get out in the world, but they worked and they were about the right size. Once we actually had some initial robots we could test with and some autism treatment centers as partners, we were able to just start testing some of these vague ideas and working with autism experts to do it. And I mean, there was a holy crap moment. I think the first time we got one of these early robots into a therapy center and in front of a kid who was considered nonverbal, non-communicative, and he just, like, when he came into the room, he zeroed in on this early prototype robot and just said hi to it. Oh. And he had never done that with anyone else. So
that's a much better holy crap moment than my software routine worked. I mean, that's the human side of it all.
Yeah.
It's fantastic.
But, with hardware, it's tough because hardware, unlike software, it's really long kind of process times to get it to anything. Unlike if you're starting a software company where you can go and raise seed of 25 grand or 50 grand, you kind of need 5 to 10x to do anything when you're in hardware and robotics. So had to raise a good amount of seed money to start with, and then just kind of kept going with it and had a bunch of milestones along the way, and have been able to kind of keep raising money and see a day where we could actually be in the black and operating on our own, where next raise will hopefully be for significant growth much faster than just kind of survival.
We'll hear from people around the world that they don't have close-in role models. The entrepreneur may be somebody who's running a small restaurant or a store, and it's not family, it's first generation. I mean, this is mine, this is what I did. What did your dad do? You said he was a lifelong entrepreneur. What did he do, and how did that impress upon you growing up?
When I was 6, 7, 8, he had started this new company in real estate, actually, and took it from just this small thing that owned some restaurant properties and grew it to a big restaurant REIT that they actually IPO'd on the New York Stock Exchange. And so, wow. I mean, I lived in a house where this was, real extreme from little bit of kind of he and some friends put some initial capital in and raised some money to get this thing started, and just grew it and grew it and grew it and grew it. And then I'll also give my mother credit because she's also an MBA, but she kind of worked in the philanthropic space more so. So she was chairman of the board of Parkland Hospital here in Dallas in the 80s during the AIDS epidemic.
Original Parkland.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. I grew up in a household where it was kind of, it was really encouraged, anything I had as an idea where I kind of started making money at it. I had a really interesting support mechanism and encouragement mechanism to really just kind of pursue it to a bigger level than a lot. And so that was just, that's kind of the weird, cool background. And then I also started working in research labs when I was 13 years old. So I've got this kind of two-track life, I guess, when you look at that led me to this weird place I am at now, where I'm doing something that I'm proud of and is helping people and is very entrepreneurial.
Well, it sounds like you grew up in a research lab. I mean, with those parents. And what I find it really remarkable, what you're talking about, you're describing your mom at Parkland Hospital and the things that she was caring about, and you talked about your dad with the technology solution that went all the way to IPO. And both of those really come together with your company. It's technology that has not altruism, there's a capitalist angle here, but it's a capitalist angle towards solving a problem that needs solving for the very human part of all of us. It's the part that needs assistance. As you were talking, I was remembering what you said a minute ago about working with your dad. Now, how did it come that you work with him when you've now said, Dad, I'm going to leave the research job I've got, and they've been kind of helping me out, using some space and kind of cohabitating a little bit, incubating, or whatever the right word is, and I'm going to step out on my own, and then your dad's with you. How did that happen?
Working with my dad, I think part of it was the timing was right. He was just actually exiting another company that he had built over previous several years, and I was more of an engineer than anything else at the time. I had done a lot of entrepreneurial things, but nothing at the scale this needed to be kind of when it started. I'd had a small fashion company when I was younger, and we had some people manufacturing stuff for me, and I had a t-shirt company and did a software company with some friends in college and stuff like that, but never anything where it was just kind of, I needed capital pretty quickly. I needed to build a real team, and the sales side of it was this whole area that I just didn't know how to approach at the time. And he was available basically and had been helping and talking through a lot of this stuff. And he's a kind of product development guy at core. I mean, he's done a lot of other things, but he thinks about things in those terms. And so he really helped me formulate this whole product concept in terms of, here are all the things we really need to, the boxes we need to check to make this a real usable product and not just kind of a neat engineering experiment.
How many people total do you have now on payroll?
We have at RoboKind 22 full-time employees, and then it's kind of up and down with contractors, but probably right now another 15 contractors, and depending what's going on, it can double that at times. It's not huge, but it feels like a lot of people compared to when it was me and two other guys in a living room.
Many entrepreneurs will send us questions. One of the biggest questions they say is, I got my founder, or just myself, and I'm about to hire like the first two people. What pearls do you have for making those first couple hires? People get encouragement, hey, I'd love to work with you, from a friend, or your cousin Jeremy needs a job, why don't you help him out? And you get those kind of things, but then there's the entrepreneur at the center that says, no, I gotta hire the right people, first people. What tips would you get them for processing that question?
If you can, find the right people, get to know them, because you're going to be spending more time with them than you are with your family. Obviously, skills matter and all of that, and early on, you don't have money, so you're probably giving them options and maybe a little bit of money.
Some stock.
Yeah, some stock options and a little bit of money. So you also have to find people, if that's the situation you're in, unless you're just really well funded from day one, who can do that for you. And so, especially, if you're moving from a stage where it's a bunch of friends or people who are enthusiastic about what you're doing, who are kind of giving you some part-time help in exchange for whatever, nothing, just helping you out because they like what you're doing, to really starting to build that team, you just need to be patient and also recognize if you were wrong and it's tough, that sometimes you need to get rid of people, and doing it fast. And that's not an easy thing, and this isn't stuff I did really well early on. This is stuff I now have perspective on. So, getting rid of people faster, which is a tough thing to say, and it's something that I found no one really likes to talk about, but if they're a bad fit, keeping them there isn't good for you, and it's not good for them. So it's a two-way street. You're not doing anyone any favors by keeping someone on. As you grow, someone who was the right fit for you on day one or week one may not be the right fit when you've got a team of 15 or 20 or 50 people and you're growing, because we're not all right for those different types of environments as they evolve. The number of hats I wear has changed, up and down throughout the years, as well as what I do on a day-to-day basis. And there are certain things I've tried to do within RoboKind where I've failed outright, and I just am not a good fit, and it's not the way I think. And if I wasn't the guy in charge, I should have been fired from that position and ultimately had to remove myself from that position. So it's not, it's not unique to
anyone. It's just you've got to really make sure you're doing what's right for the mission, basically.
The first 2 hires you made, were they like additional engineers or was it a finance person? What were those initial hires for you? Because obviously you're the technologist and the product vision.
First 2 hires were software and another engineer. What we do is complex in terms of the robotics portion of it. And early on, we had these kind of concepts around autism, but we needed a platform before we could even start working on it, on the curriculum piece. And so I was very lucky because I had this other entire team I'd worked with, and one of them was willing to come with me and start working on this project. So I had that relationship. And then my now engineering director, who was our second hire, he and I went to college together and worked on projects together. And so I kind of had that relationship. And he was helping me out early on before I had any money at all to kind of pay. And then once I raised some money, we'd talked about it a little bit before, but I texted him and I said, hey, quit your job and come work for me. I'll give you 1/3 of what you're making now and you'll work 3 times as hard.
It's a deal.
Yeah, it's a huge deal. So he texted me back a few hours later and he said, I hope you're serious because I just put in my 2 weeks notice.
Did you have people that came to you sort of as interns or volunteers because they believed in the cause and they were willing to literally work for almost nothing for a short time at least, just to get the experience and to support what you were doing?
I had huge amounts of help from all over the place in terms of volunteer labor, advice from people who really understood like the education industry when I had no experience in it, just on the hardware side, access basically free or at just absolute cost on 3D printing and machining of parts and laser cutting and all types of other stuff and board assembly and all this other stuff that I kind of had an idea, but it's the stuff that makes like hardware development and robotics development like really expensive. And so I had people just helping me out all the time. As we've grown, we still do internships. Now we can sometimes afford to pay a little bit. But we did a lot of unpaid internships early on also with a lot of smart kids. And, I did what I could to help them with their goals basically after they left, whether it was finding a job, somewhere cool like Disney Imagineering or going to grad school at a top tier university and things like that, because I have, some relationships in those spaces. And so when you don't have money and you're not quite able or ready to give away, a bunch of stock options and equity and stuff like that, you trade in relationships and favors until you have whatever the money or the options or whatever you can do where you're ready to make real commitments to people and can afford to.
Do you have a management credo or a philosophy that you specifically articulate to the team? Or is it more of a culture that you just establish and you let it sort of by osmosis affect people in peer base?
Yeah.
Which is it for you?
I've never really had the experience of a normal work environment or corporate work environment. And I think that in those types of places, I personally am wholly unemployable. So I tend to be I'm big on making sure communication is happening, because that's the most important thing in terms of with me, within teams and stuff like that. But I'm really bad, and some people who are team leads or managers, I know I frustrate the heck out of them, because I will go and talk to anyone at any level and ask them what's going on, what they're working on, sometimes wholly distract them from what they're doing and ask them to do something else for me. And so but ultimately, if you're managing that way, or if that's kind of the company culture, it's really important to make sure everyone understands the goals and the missions. And so that's something in terms of back to that communication piece, you can't have that type of, informal structure basically,
Sure,
without making sure that everyone understands what we're doing, because we're in the education space. we have more rigid deadlines sometimes than other industries because, school is starting soon. That's when we're onboarding a bunch of new customers. That's when we're delivering stuff, and that's when all of our existing customers have to get their updates before school starts. And so, depending what state you're in, school starts as early as August 1st in some places. And so we have this staggered, hectic period between like beginning of August and kind of middle of September. So we've got to hit those deadlines. And then after that, things relax a little more, and because of the industry we're in, no one wants updates in the middle of the year either. So if you don't hit that, then you don't get to update most customers until like after the winter break. So there we have some weird structure, but because people understand what the mission is and they understand the deadlines and the goals, and that the deadlines are not artificial, that they're actually real things in terms of us being successful as a company, they get it and they're willing to put in the effort whenever they need to and put in extra time and stuff like that.
Very cool. Well, you bring up school, and school's about to start right now. And when school starts, the classroom's got to be ready. Teachers got to be ready, books have to be ready, everything's got to be there and be ready. And when the bell rings, you have to be there in the classroom because you've made this commitment. You've sold a school or a school district on using these tools. In a previous life, we had software that we did for the NFL. And you know what? The first game is there in August, and then the only time you were allowed to do an update, like a software push, was like on a Thursday. Because he had this little thing about Sunday going on. They were really busy on Sunday, and you just couldn't, you couldn't mess it up on Sunday. And I had friends at other software development companies who were like, man, that's kind of harsh. They just decide, well, maybe we'll get the update done Monday, maybe Thursday, we'll send it to Apple, people will get the little red dot on their app and they know it's time to update it. And it's like, you guys, you're doing great work, but half of what you're doing is a dream world, because some of us are in realms where the bell rings and it's time to perform. And speaking of performing, who is this?
This is Milo.
Tell me about Milo.
He's our facially expressive robot, and we use him to teach social and emotional skills to kids on the autism spectrum.
Show me what happens.
All right.
So he is basically part of a classroom, like a textbook, but he's a super high-tech textbook.
Exactly. So we have a very comprehensive social and emotional learning curriculum for kids on the autism spectrum, and Milo facilitates lessons. So what we've seen is that the data shows that people on the autism spectrum only engage with their therapist in a traditional setting 2 to 3% of a session, which, if you think about that over 20 minutes non-consecutively, is sub 30 seconds. So just think about this as any other type of education, and you've only got your students for 30 seconds. It's hard to teach them anything. So a lot of kids don't make much progress in the traditional therapy model. They engage 87.5% of the time with Milo. So this isn't like a little bit different, it is a complete and total paradigm shift. So what Milo does is he basically explains a lesson concept. So I'm gonna basically teach everyone how to say hi, just basic intro to greetings. He'll speak kind of slowly, and then you'll see flashcards on his chest. All the vocabulary is very consistent. And then you'll see videos on the tablet, because it's not just about the concept. We're teaching you social interaction, so you need to see it. And then we quiz. And so it's basically a lot of repetition and reinforcement and then quizzing to track progress. And that's kind of the model of how this works.
So we're going to experience this the way a child right here would be in a classroom set up for Milo to take him through a lesson.
Exactly.
All right.
All right. So we'll get him going. It'll take a second since we just turned him on.
If only we had like a student, or better yet, a U.S. Senator who would be perfectly appropriate to go through this.
Absolutely. We've done this with U.S. Senators. There we go.
We're going to learn about saying hi to friends today. This is called greeting. When we greet a friend, we look at the friend's face, smile, and say hi. I can say hi to other kids. I can say hi to grown-ups. Let's see some of my friends saying hi to each other. Look at the tablet.
Totally get it. So now you've got the child is seeing a toy that's not really a toy. They're seeing video, which kids gravitate to. You've got flashcards there. How long did it take from a product perspective, whether you're making t-shirts in Berlin or you're making something really complicated, the development cycle is going to be there. And what was your development cycle on this in terms of the time to get the very, very first one into a classroom? Maybe as the MVP. A lot of entrepreneurs are reading the books that are out, talk about minimum viable product, Eric Rye's Lean Startup. What kind of time did it take you to get to that point?
So our first generation robots, which were similar to this, but a little bigger and more complex, it took about 8 months before we had our first functional-ish one. But our first kind of real functional prototype of what would become this, it took almost 2 years of development to get in place. And so we developed the first gen robots to have something fast, to be able to start testing in a classroom and start working with autism experts to develop some of the curriculum. And that was its own set of challenges, because autism experts don't think about how do you deliver this in a way that a robot can deliver it. So it took finding the right people. But the actual hardware, first prototype I think we had that was good enough to put in a classroom was almost 2 years.
But that minimum viable product to get some feedback in a real environment, about 8 months.
Yeah.
Which is quicker than I thought it would be. So what was it like, inside your company as you're driving to that point, to that 8 month to get the first one in there? How did you keep the team motivated, and what was special about that time?
We were still really operating out of a living room. And so everyone was right there all the time. The shop was literally a garage and a dining room table. And we had some 3D printers, and I think that was our second equipment purchase as a company, was a 3D printer. The fun thing, I guess, with robotics is you do get to see some progress along the way. As you build the arm and get some stuff off a 3D printer and start putting it together, you get to see the little subcomponents and sub-assemblies come together and get them moving and get them doing things, and slowly you build up and put it together. And so there were these kind of incremental pieces of progress, like the very first just kind of, here's all the motors together and they work and we can control them. I think we got that done in about 2 months, and there was no aesthetic to it. It was ugly as hell. And just laser cut black box with motors just screwed into it and motors screwed to motors, but it was enough to just test the idea in terms of, can this robot stand up, and all kinds of stuff like that. The head and the face, that's kind of where a lot of our magic is, because we're the only ones who do small scale expressive faces, and we're the only ones who do them in a mass producible capacity. And so that's really been something that sets us apart. And so the original material we used for the original prototypes was very different than what we ended up with. It was a cool material, but when we transitioned to manufacture, it turned out that it would cost more to make just the skin for the face than our budget for the entire robot. And so had to go back to the drawing board on that and come up with something that was producible in like a traditional manufacturing scenario. And so that's one of those areas we learned a lot.
Can you share maybe a mistake that happened early on? It can be like a noble failure, not some just blatheringly dumb mistake. A lot of mistakes are just, failures. Can you share something that happened that maybe didn't have, a Hollywood happy ending, but we learned this and then we figured it out and the music played and we pulled it out of the ditch?
Beyond a mistake, I have a fail.
You have a fail?
Yeah.
Well, there's got to be fails in softwares and product development because you're building things. So there's got to be fails along the way. What happened?
So I was at a conference, and this was early on with one of our really early prototypes. And everything was 3D printed, and if you know how 3D printers work, it's all just layers and layers of plastic. We're on national television, we're doing an interview, and the robot's kind of smiling and doing its thing, and the neck bracket breaks, and the head just falls off and is hanging by wires, and it's still moving. And in hindsight, it's hilarious. And I was just frozen and mortified. And they didn't cut away from me for like 20 seconds.
Those last two things we just talked about, mistakes, are really important lessons. What are some tips that you would give people, whether they're doing something this complex or they're doing something simple as making t-shirts in Berlin?
One of the tips I would give is whatever your product is, get it in front of your actual customers as quickly as possible. Because it doesn't matter how good your idea is in your mind until someone tells you they'll give you money for it or actually gives you money for it, you've had no validation. As you grow, don't be afraid to scrap things you've done, rebuild them completely because you know how to do it better, and basically reprocess your entire organization at certain growth phases. I think Guy Kawasaki in Art of the Start, he says 3 and 10 rule. Basically every tripling of the size of your team, all the process you've had in place no longer works. And you need to rethink everything, including your culture. I've found that, we're kind of at the cusp of our next tripling. I've found that to be true even with where I've gone, and I've seen it in friends' organizations as well. Sometimes you build software that is great in your first 1,000 customers or your first 10,000 customers, and it will not scale beyond that. And if you try and hold on to it too long, then you just, suddenly you're buying 8x more server time than you need because there are efficiencies you could build in, but you'd have to tear its heart out of your current product and rebuild it, and that's scary. Just do it. Like, hanging on to that stuff for too long costs you way more than you could ever imagine. And I've done all of these things I'm recommending. I've been on the other side of that, and I've made the wrong decision at least some of the time. And so I've learned it the hard way. I've read what not to do and still done the wrong thing. And that's part of it, right? Nothing's perfect. There's never perfect efficiencies in what you do. You grow and you learn, and as you have more experience, you're able to make those decisions faster and recognize them earlier on in whatever your process is.
So going beyond, mistakes and going beyond tips, it's really important to get out from behind the curtain that you're working under every day and really know, is the product really working? Is it really being adopted? And in the digital world, we can look at views and how long people watch a video and things like this, but it's not always that easy. Measurement is really key. What are your thoughts on that?
Being able to kind of measure progress, whatever that progress is important. So you need to put those tools in place. With what we do, it's not always as easy, but we're also kind of jumping into a space where whatever little bits of measurement or data there have generally been subjective kind of feedback and observational data, and no one's really had hard data in the autism space, and data's just kind of creeping its way into the education space more generally. So in autism, we're coming into a space where we're able to, as we start working with students, baseline them in a number of different areas and then measure their progress in terms of through the course in a real quantifiable way and show it. And it's important, especially in autism, because kids are so different, no one's the same, to baseline them, and so you're measuring their own progress against their starting point. And then in aggregate, we're able to show a teacher or an administrator, here's the impact the program is having. And because education's a weird space unto itself, because the end users are the teachers and the students, but the people making the purchasing decisions are special ed directors, principals, superintendents, state level special ed directors. And we learn, through a lot of experience that you need to make sure you keep those individuals informed. So what I care about most is kind of the impact we're having on the student, and not even about how they're doing with the robot. We're working with kids on the spectrum, some of whom are nonverbal, non-communicative. And if they have, and they've been in years of therapy and are still there. And in the most extreme cases, 2-3 sessions after they start working with our robots, they go home, they say hi to their parents for the first time, they start participating in class, and now they're making
real measurable progress and observational progress, because I care about generalization of the skills we're teaching these kids, not how they're doing with the robot. And so that makes it even kind of harder to measure. Sometimes kids don't do that well on our quizzes and stuff like that, but we get feedback that they're doing really well in the real world and they're practicing how to say hi and things like that.
Wow, you've made a lot of progress, come a long way, some very fulfilling moments as a CTO and a co-founder. What is next for the company? Is it expansion? Is it Milo 2.0? Is it raising money? And how are you and your dad working together as entrepreneurs to address those challenges?
So in terms of what's next, we are looking to raise more money. And this time we're really looking at kind of strategic money with people that are in the education space that are, adding value. And that's something that once you've made enough progress, you sometimes have the luxury to be able to do, is kind of pick who's giving you money. And so, ultimately for any entrepreneur, if you can, pick who's giving you money and make sure that it's more than just money, that they have relationships that are valuable to you, that they can kind of expand your network and help bring people in to help you. And if you're raising enough money that people are joining your board, that you like having them in your lives on a regular basis and that they'll follow through on tasks you give them, because you should always put your board to work. That's kind of the best thing you can do. And then in terms of product, we've just launched our new computer science course called Robots4STEM. We're teaching elementary school kids to code using these same robots, but a very different curriculum. And the challenge there has been elementary schools don't generally have teachers who know how to teach coding. So we've developed a course that a gym teacher or a librarian can be teaching kids to code in 20 minutes of training. And that is going out into the first 50 schools in just a few weeks.
Coding's a huge topic, and the product line extending now into teaching really, really young students, young children, coding really strikes something. Before he left as CEO of GE, Jeff Immelt said that the new GE, everyone was going to learn a little bit about coding. And the reason is because we're increasingly going to live in a data world. And while you may not be doing the coding, you need to understand, whether it's coding database reports or things like that, have a functional understanding of the basics of coding so that you can be a better client asking IT to turn around projects to you so that you get output that's going to be more dynamic reports, deeper AI inferences into the data set that you have so that you can get your job done and make more informed decisions. And so this is teaching coding to people that are in this, shall we say, the last third of their career. And here you're going to children who are barely in the first third of life, and you're putting things in the classroom to help them code. I think that's phenomenal.
Absolutely.
Well, how's the dynamic with your dad as you plan for the future? Is he staying in? Are you going to help him retire, or what's happening here?
I think he's staying in. Every time he's retired, as I've grown up, has been just real tough on me, because he's a restless person. He doesn't sit still well, and neither do I. So I think I get that from him. But I think for both of us, we've always said that if we grow to a point where we're no longer useful, that's when we're out. Until then, so long as it's kind of, we're building the vision and we feel like we're the people who can actually accomplish it and achieve it, we're staying.
Hey, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to have you here. And on A Beer in Business, we want to bring entrepreneurs to you so they can bring you tips, tricks, and experiences. So whether you're making jelly in Belarus or a t-shirt company in Berlin, or you're making robots in Dallas, Texas, the path of entrepreneurship can be a little bit easier for you. Until next time, I'm Tom Ellsworth, the Biz Doc, and I hope we left you better than we found you.